Hello, Dave here. This mini morsel, Learn JavaScript with me, going through the book exercises, and this is working on chapter 5, which is introducing the control structures. Straightforward. We're still at the very beginning, so let's go ahead and buzz through that. Just to give you an idea, I've created, here's davecoast.com. You can go out there. This is where it will be posted. From there, on the navigation bar, you see Learning JavaScript. That takes you here, js.davecoast.com. I'm going to consider that production. And here's where I have all the exercises. And I'm working locally on my XAMPP server. And I just happen to call the subdirectory MJS. Same thing. This is my development. And then I push it out to production. So this is available for you to look at, critique, send me back some information. You can email me with a little button from the nav bar. Again, this is pretty low tech right now. The goal is, right, as I build all these pieces from these exercises, again, learning JavaScript in future chapters to make this spiffier and a cohesive unit. So let's go back to our local version, and I'm going to go to the chapter 5 exercises. And once again, the book is Modern JavaScript, Developed and Designed by Larry Ullman, and you can visit his site, larryullman.com. I don't have any other relationship with larryullman.com except for I purchased the book. So a little disclaimer there. So far seems pretty good. Going through the book and doing my best to learn JavaScript, have experience in other programming languages. But either way, let's go ahead and start looking at the control structures, and we'll begin by looking at the 4 examples from chapter 5. The first exercise brought to life this volume of a sphere that we did in chapter 4. And basically in chapter 4, we just did an absolute value on whatever was put in for what is the radius. So previous, it didn't matter whether you put a 5 in there and click get the volume of a sphere, or in chapter 4, well, I guess we can go and look at it. In chapter 4, in the sphere volume, if I do a -5, I get that value. Now going to chapter 5, if I put a -5 in there, I get a please enter a positive number. So did a little if statement for validating the -5. And once again, learning control structures, if then, which includes things like if then else, a case type of structure thing, and we'll be looking at the code of each of these types of things, and various types of loops, for example, a for loop, a while, and an until. And those are kind of generic concepts for any language, and the goal here going through chapter 5 is learning how those concepts are applied in JavaScript. So sample number 1 is this sphere again, and again, if a negative value is put in, we return, or I return a message into that box. But the idea is when we look at the code, you'll see an if statement in there. So let's go back to chapter 5 exercises. The second one is this membership calculator, and here we have a choice of more than one option. And this is where we would get into various case statements where there's more than one possibility, or branching possibility. And depending on the number of years entered, I'll put 5 in here right now, it'll calculate a cost. It applies a discount of 20% for 20 years or more. And again, now you see, we need some if statements. We have some conditional branching in order to accomplish the calculations. So we took something extremely simple. It's still pretty simple, but now we're starting to add some of the programming complexity to our programs. Let's go back. The next one is this contact form. And here we enter an email address like dave@davecoast.com and put in some comments. Here are some demo comments, right? And I validate that. And notice it says, way to go, you've done good. Just returning a little message here if it is good. But for example, let's put an invalid email address out there. And we pop up an alert box. Hey, come on, you know how to enter a valid address. And the same down in the text here. Here is some text. And if I try to put some HTML in there, h1/h1, and validate that. Well, first of all, valid email address. And then, hey, come on, we don't allow HTML in the comments. So that's taking it a little bit farther. Again, we're doing some form validation. Let's go back and doing a simple loop. And this simple loop basically is just doing a for and doing 6 random numbers using the math object, the random method. And let me go ahead and refresh that. You'll see that the numbers change, refresh, 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 and each time it's running through that loop. And once again, we'll go ahead and take a look at the code for these in a moment. But here is a loop that's executing something 6 times. So our introduction to a loop. So we have basically if statements, alert boxes, a case type of structure statement, and a for loop. So let's take a brief walkthrough of the code, and then we hopefully will have time to walk through a couple of these exercises in Debugger. And I invite you to go to js.davecoast.com. Come on out here in either Chrome or Firefox and debug away, and you can see all the values in here and play around with it a little bit. Once again, here's our Chapter 5 exercises. Again, I'm in Chrome right now. Let's take a look at the code here. I have, here's the sphere, and it's relatively straightforward, and we're going to go ahead and walk through this in Debugger also. But nothing has changed with the window.onload, and go to a listen function. That listen function is waiting for the submit button. Again, no new concepts yet, but now in the actual function, this calc for Dave function, we've added an if statement in here, and if these values are true, execute this conditional logic, else execute this conditional logic. So let's take a quick look at that. Right, so I'm basically saying if radius, so is there a value or is there a radius out there? And again, variable radius equal document.getElementById radius ID. So if this actual value from the screen gets placed in this value, we have if radius. So that means that it does exist from the screen. And the and a in there, so got to know your ands and ors. And if you want any more detail into any of these kind of statements, just let me know, dave@davecoast.com. I'd be glad to get deeper into conditionals and those types of features. But anyway, so here's our and radius.value is greater than 0. So was a value actually placed in there, and was that value greater than 0? And there's our positive. Check if it is. So it is on the screen. It's greater than 0. Then we go ahead and set volume equal to 4/3 times the math.pi, so that's the pi method of the math object, and the power object of the math object, where we're raising that radius to the power of 3. And then we set the decimal points to 4 decimal points. So it's basically these 2 lines of code are doing the actual calculation. Now, if we don't have a radius value greater than 3, we're going to return this message and just happen to return that message right into this volume variable. And then this volume variable is going back to the screen. So the volume variable is either going to have a message or the formatted to 4 decimal point string representation of this calculation will be in volume. Okay, pretty straightforward, but anyway, here's an if and an else. Once again, if that doesn't make sense, please let me know. We return false so that it doesn't happen again. And I'll have this code. This code is already posted and it's available at davecoast.com. Here is the HTML for it. And again, you see here's the form and the radius and the volume and the button. And down here is the actual link to this JavaScript file. Let's go ahead and take a look at member now. And just to remind you, right, here's our membership calculation. We have this 4 options, and we have the number of years, and we calculate the cost. So if we look at this membership calculation, and again, this is a little longer, and it's just how, not too complex, don't get scared. And once again, if I see something bigger than a page, then I think it should be broken out into a separate function or module or whatever the language supports. But again, this is intro and learning. I'm following the rules here. And it's not that much more. I mean, you can almost see this whole statement, but if you can't read that whole statement, it needs to be broken up, or I think it does. Having to scroll around too many pages makes it hard to follow. Let's go ahead and buzz through this guy. Once again, from the bottom up, window.onload, again, nothing new. We do this membership listen function. The membership listen function waits for the button to be clicked, the .onSubmit method, and once that happens, we execute this function, calc membership. So the variable member cost we create, and right now we don't assign a value to it. Then we get the 2 values from the screen, the member type ID and the member length ID, and basically this is what type of membership, right, which is this select membership level, and then the length is enter years. Probably should not have used member length for the name here. Again, learning, lessons learned, would not use that again, right, because there is a method called .length, and that would tell you the length of the variable. So calling something member length, it just gets confusing. So that was a mistake using member length in my variable name. Probably should have called it member number of years, whatever it is, a little something more, something that is clearer. So we get these 2 values from the screen. So now we have a type and we have a length. Now, if there is a member length, so if it is there and member length value, right, and there is a value in member length, that's number of years, then member length is equal to parse init, right? So we're going to turn this into an integer, right? The value of that member length, and it's going to be done in base 10, which we're mostly doing base 10 for day-to-day activities, right? Unless you're doing hex or some other type of calculation. So there's our member length. And then continuing on, and notice that this is indented. So this is only going to be executed when this is true. So if member type and member type has a value and member length has a value and it's greater than 0, and I need to verify whether I believe that that ended this if statement and that this guy actually should be back here. And I just changed that before, pardon me, but let's keep this as clear as possible. And there is a quicker way to de-indent all that stuff, but I can't do that this moment. And there we go. All right. So once again, our next if statement, apologize for that little spaz moment there. So once again, if member type and there's a value in member type and member length, and the member length is greater than 0, right? So there is some repetition to up above, but now we're going to use this switch, and the switch is a beautiful thing, and that gives us the ability to break into 4 different areas. Now in the book, they basically just do the switch and they do member type dot value, and that will work for this specific case where every single conditional here uses the same value. It's just that that is not often the case in real life. And a common way of getting around that is to just say switch true, and then you can do any kind of case, and these are like separate if statements, do them however you wish. And that's why I decided to use the switch true style here, because that's how I would normally do it in any other language. So we could say case member type dot value equal cheapo, and if we look over here, here's the HTML, and you see here inside the form, our value could either be cheapo, basic, almost, or yippee. So I have cheapo, basic, almost, and yippee. I attach a value to it, right? A sign. So this is saying if. Notice that this has 2 equal signs. So that's doing the if this value is equal to cheapo, only 1 equal sign is assigning this 10.00 to member cost, and then doing a break, which takes us completely out. Okay, and I'm not, and there's break and there is continue, but you need a way to get out and quit executing these statements. So we're saying we're all done here since we have a member cost. We don't want to do anything else within this environment. So once again, these 4 are basically the same. Basic, move 15 in there. Almost, move 20 in there. Yippee, move 50 in there, right? If member cost, member cost times member length, right? So we're going to go ahead and set this member cost value. We just put a 20 in there, and we're going to take the length, again, that's the number of years, and multiply that by the member cost and place that value in member cost. Now, if the member length is greater than 1, right? So 2, 3, 4, it's just an integer. So anything greater than, so 2 years or greater, we're going to apply a 20% discount. And we're just going to do the multiply by 0.80, right? That's applying that 20% discount. And then let's put that cost and send that back to the screen, right? And we're concatenating the $ in front of it. And we're also keeping it to 2 decimal points. Otherwise, I'm going to send back I see an invalid value in there. Then we return false, right? So if we come back here and I put can I put a -4? What's my cost? Must be greater than or equal to 1. Okay, so I put a 5 in there. And I'll do an almost. And it will calculate that. Notice 5 times 20 should have been 100, right? 20%, it comes out to 80. Okay, so that's our membership calculator. Again, this is one of our best friends for a control structure. And again, just doing the switch true style makes it easy so that each of these conditionals can be different and aren't related to a specific variable. Very common for menus. Okay, let's take a look at the contact form. If we look at the contact form, again, here we are validating that we have a valid email address and that we do not put HTML in the comments. So looking at that JavaScript code, or this JavaScript code, right? Once again, starting from the bottom, window.onload, contact listen, waiting for the on submit button. Then we validate the content. We set the variable OK equal to true. And again, this is for our return value. And we're going to return OK. It seems that no matter what, I am setting it to false. But again, it can be true or false depending on what's going on. And I believe that that impacts the text boxes. Again, something to trying to get a handle on exactly the differences, because right now it seems that I can return true or false there, and either way it works in Chrome or Firefox. So I'm not sure if that's a browser issue. Anyway, let's keep going here, but we're creating a new variable called OK, and right now it's set to true. We're creating another variable called success test, and just happen to put in this Wahoo message. Yeah, you did it correctly. And an email address variable, and getting this from the screen, whatever is entered. Also creating a comments variable, getting this from the screen, whatever was entered. And here is our if statement. And once again, first of all, if I wasn't following along in the book, I would do everything in my power to avoid using nots. You see this not, or not. You start using nots and it gets very confusing. Here's more nots, right? As far as I'm concerned, I would not allow that, and I would not write it that way. But again, that's not the focus of this specific exercise. This exercise is getting to the point of putting these alerts out without having too much code here. So let's keep it simple. We'll go ahead and use the not. But just in general, if I see a not, I better be able to explain why I'm using a not, and should have done everything in my power to avoid using that not. So that's not to say never use not. See how confusing it gets just trying to talk about it? Anyway, please try to avoid using not. Let's go through this. If not email address, right? So that means that an email address, that variable, right, doesn't even exist from doing this, right? That means that it doesn't have a reference to the screen value. And if it does not have it does not have a value, or its length is less than 6, and that's just the smallest that email address could be, something like a b at c.de. I think that's the smallest valid email address. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh no, maybe it's just b at c.de. I think that's as small as you can get, which is 6 characters. So that's why the length thing there says if it's less than 6, or less than 6, or the value dot index of the @ equal -1, which means if there is no @ this index of method will return a value of -1. So if any of these are true, then we're going to set OK to false and send the alert. And that is why it is confusing when you talk about nots and trues. But anyway, it's basically saying, are we good or are we bad? And this is basically saying, are we bad? Then do this, right? Where I would say, if we're good, continue, else do the bad stuff. But again, intro stuff, still worth understanding. Okay, so if that's bad, we're going to send that alert out. Then we're moving on. And again, should we even bother doing these kind of checks after this one is already bad? Sometimes we should, sometimes we shouldn't. But let's continue. So if not comments and not comments values, same basic type of thing, and it's looking for a less than sign, and that's what we're doing to determine whether there's HTML in there. Okay, and notice, and now we got not equal -1. So if this index of, so this means that it actually did find it. Can you get more confusing? So if there is actually one of those in there, right, it would have a value greater than this. It would have, it would have that index value, which would equal to 0 up to, based on wherever it is in the text. A -1 means it did not find it in the text. And that's what we want, that it did not find it in the text. So, okay, false, alert, come on, and you can put whatever text you want in there. I just was playing around, did an apostrophe in here for the don't with an escape character with the slash, right, in comments, right? So that's bad, that's bad. Then we say if okay, so okay would be true here. Here it gets turned to false, here it gets turned to false. I'm going to say, way to go, you done good, just to enter a value out there and return false and then return. And we'll buzz through this real quick in Debugger, but let's here's the HTML for that. And here's the form. And let's take a look at Loopy. And this is really quite simple. Once again, our window.onload, loop and reset. And here we don't even have a button. So all we're doing is basing it all on hitting the refresh button, right? Our simple loop, right? There is no button to push on here. But every time I refresh the page, it gives me new numbers. So we don't even have a button. So onload, I set this thing out. So I refresh the page. It redoes the onload. It'll come through here. It'll create a variable called loopy numbers. And for variable loopy index equals 0. So it sets this to 0 first. Then it's got a semicolon. Then we do loopy if, and this is basically the second hunk here to this semicolon. And it's basically saying if loopy index is less than 6, go ahead and execute the loop statements and set loopy index ++ increment it by 1 each time you crank through this loop. And here's the end tag and the begin tag, and here's the statement. And it can be multiple statements, but here's what we are executing. And we're taking this variable, loopy numbers, and we are adding to it the parsed integer of the math.random method value times 100. And it's basically, since math.random returns a value between 0 and 1, right? We're moving the decimal point out so that we have a 2-digit number, and we're using the base of 10, and we're adding a space there, so we have a space. in between our numbers here. See that space? And we even have a space at the end here. And if I refresh, see, it just goes through that loop. It's happy 6 times, right? Then if will be export.text content. So this text content is for non-Internet Explorer, and it basically says if this method is available, right? That's why it's, you know, not undefined. We go ahead and set loopy numbers into the text content. So this is our introduction to DOM manipulation, and I believe this is going to be the cool stuff, how we actually inserted this code into this span right here. Right here. And that's why I called it insert here. And back there, notice that we just have a span within a paragraph. Well, that's just a span within a paragraph. So we are doing DOM manipulation with this text content method. And we are checking to see whether that method exists, which it does, I believe. And I'm learning this also, but I believe IE is the only thing, and it might be only IE up to certain levels. But then we have to use this inner text, which is a deprecated function. So we'll be export.innerText, and that's our little if statement there. But otherwise, pretty straightforward. We'll take a look at 1 or 2 of these. Yeah, let's just take a look at one in Debugger just to get a good feel for it. And again, remember, you could zip out to js.davecoast.com and debug away and see how this code actually works. All right, I'm pretty sure that every programming language handles these if statements, for loops, pretty much the same concepts. So I apologize if I'm buzzing through it a little quick, just trying to get to some spiffier items and get past these intro lessons. Just a little over anxious, I guess. So if, like I said before, if you have any desire for me to go and do a deeper dive into any of these items, just let me know. Be glad to do it. Let's take a look and let's go ahead and debug this chapter 5 exercise, calculate membership. And if we're going to do debug, I don't want to do it in Chrome. I want to do it in Firefox, because Firefox is spiffier, and just using Firebug here is so much more convenient to me. I find it very simple to use. So let's go ahead and go to this membership calc. Let's turn on Firebug. We'll reload that. Right, here's our script. And let's see if we can get most of it, all of it on the screen. There we go. In fact, here's the comments portion. Let's just try to gain some real estate here. Move this up. All right. And here's our membership screen. I just wanted to bring this guy back and set our breakpoint before I lose him. So I'm going to come here to the first executable statement and set my breakpoint. And we're going to go ahead and walk through this guy quickly. So if I come back over here and pick a membership level, and let's pick almost, and we'll give it 4 years. Click our button, and look at that. Here's our debug session. Here's our values over here. You see we have almost, we have our 4, and we haven't sent a calculation back yet. And we use this little arrow down thing that has the step into, or F11 associated with it, to step through. Once again, debugger. We set a breakpoint, so it stops there. We set other breakpoints. Once you have more code, obviously, it makes a difference. And this highlighted line in the program is the next one to be executed. It has not been executed again yet. And here's our watch list. And this shows us what is available in the program and what the values are. So let's go ahead and start stepping through. So the first thing we did, we created this variable member cost. Here it is, member cost, and it's does not have a value yet because we did not assign it a value. Let's execute the next statement. So now we, into member type, notice that it shows the member type ID here, and here's it's from that select. Here's our select, and again, that's this value here coming into the program. Let's step again, and member length, right? Document.getElementById. Let's get that member length ID. Now we can say if member length. We're about to execute this if statement. And there's the and part. And do we go here or do we jump out? That's the question. And we go ahead and execute this because this is true and this is true. If that was the or, the bar, right, it would be if either one of those were true. But since this is true and this is true, we go ahead and execute this line of code. And that's important to know right now. And notice that this member length dot value is equal to 4. So let's go ahead and execute it. And that placed that into member length. And that's the number of years. So now we have this 4 in the variable member length. Let's keep going. Now we're going to check this if statement, if member type, and right, we have 4 ands here that we have to make it through to get down to the switch, right? And it keeps going because so far so good. And we're into the switch. So all of these guys are true because they are ands and they had to be true, right? We can see those values, right? It's got a value of 4 that is greater than 0. So switch true, and now it's going to find which case to execute, right? Is it equal to, is this value? Oh, see, it's equal to almost. That's not basic. Almost equal almost. So this should be the next executable line of code. Let's see what happens. Okay, so it's going to do that case statement. That wasn't true, so we pop down to this case statement. That wasn't true, so we pop down to this case statement. That was true, right? This value is equal to almost, right? Equal, member cost, which is currently undefined, we're going to assign it the value of 20. So let's execute that, and now let's break, which pops us out of the switch statement to the next executable line of code, which is doing this member cost times the member length. And we go ahead and do that, so that now it's equal to 80, right? 20 times 4 is 80. Here's our values over here. Let's keep going. Here's our if statement. Is member length greater than 1? Well, member length is 4. I would say yes, so that should be true, and we should execute that statement. Let's go ahead, and it is about to execute that statement and apply the discount. So now it applied that 0.80. The value is now 64. And again, the beauty of Firebug here, I can hover over here and see the 64. Execute the next, right outside of these brackets. We execute this value to put it back out here on the screen. So now when I click this, watch down here, it should fill it in. And there's our $64, right, with the dollar signs and everything, right? Here's that, because we executed that line of code. and that's why we have a $sign here. And now we return, and we're done. So there is conditionals, the end of chapter 5, moving on to chapter 6 next, which gets introducing to complex variable types, things like objects, and hopefully we just start getting spiffier and spiffier down the JavaScript road. So thank you very much for watching. You can visit js.davecoast.com to play around with these exercises, put them in debug if you wish. I'm considering that my production environment. And you can also let me know if there's anything you would like or feedback in general. We can make this interactive, or I would like to. Also, there's email me, dave@davecoast.com. Thank you for watching.